And you are back here with the American Dream Team on Siren 107.3 FM. That was Man on the Moon from R.E.M. Apparently the last decent song they did, according to our studio guest. So we might get into that conversation later on, who knows. Before the Sky News there, we had Adele, Rolling in the Deep, and the Plain White Tees and Delilah. It's just before 6:10, and so I am delighted to say that we are joined now officially in the studio by our guest, John Connolly. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here. I'm allowed to talk now.
You are allowed to talk
say anything. Sit in the corner very quietly like a small child.
Get you accustomed to the feel here of the American Dream Team. Not that we even know what it is, so I don't suppose it really matters. But
you don't look very American.
No.
You don't. I'm not sure quite what I was expecting. Everybody's dressed like Uncle Sam.
We could try that.
That'd be quite beards on.
That's maybe an option. For
next time you come to visit, we'll all be dressed up as different American icons.
That'd be great. Or just all try and dress up like the Harlem Globetrotters or something. Where,
that could be fun.
Really interesting.
We'll get
to see.
Basketball hoop in the
corner.
Charlotte once dressed up as Abraham Lincoln, complete with the moustache. So
yeah, that was brilliant.
Was the moustache your own, or did you have to borrow it?
No, I had to borrow it.
Okay, because if you'd grown it, that would have been an embarrassing conversation, really, wouldn't it?
Bit awkward, but
lovely lady, a bit hirsute, but a lovely lady.
Yeah, well, obviously you're here promoting your new Charlie Parker book, The Wrath of Angels.
You're promoting two books, actually, The Wrath of Angels and an anthology that I've edited.
Which
I won't make the mistake of doing again, let me tell you.
And the other one is called Books to Die For.
Books to Die For,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, Books to Die For. Yeah, but it was a weird thing. We thought, a friend and I thought that it was very difficult for people to go into a bookstore and who like mystery fiction to kind of decide where to start other than the new stuff, because if you go into a bookstore, it's all new stuff at the front of the store, and if you decide you want to look for old stuff in any genre, I feel the same way when I go into, say, the fantasy section or the science fiction section. I have no idea where to start. They all look like really, really big books that I may die before I finish. And I've reached that age where now I look at a book and think, that's a bit long. And if I suddenly get told, you've only got, you've only got a week to live, you think, I'm not sure I'll get through all of a Game of Thrones. Maybe I'll take The Great Gatsby instead. So it was a chance to kind of put that together. And the problem I discovered was that because we thought we'd get crime writers from around the world to do it. So we thought we'd approach about 120 writers to do it. And then most of them went, yeah, that seems like a fantastic idea. And then what I realised is that all writers just view deadlines as entirely advisory. A deadline isn't really a deadline. A deadline's just a suggestion. That somebody might say, if you could get around to it sometime around then, that would be really, really good.
It's actually a similar system to being a student. A deadline is just a guideline.
I used to be able to work to deadlines, and now I've decided I want to be a writer. I can't work to deadlines at all, so I'm obviously in training.
Yeah, I don't know what it is with writers and deadlines, because you would think that deadlines would be quite helpful, because, you think your book's going to have to be out by Christmas. Probably a good idea to deliver it before December, just so we can get it done. But I remember the late Douglas Adams, who was a dreadful man for getting stuff done, because he really didn't like writing. The man who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he really struggled with it. He used to say that he loved deadlines because he liked the sound that they made as they whizzed by, which is really, really unhelpful. I think at one point his editor locked him into a hotel room and insisted that he just write. And every time he wrote a page, the editor would take it away and they would get set with typesetting it, because he just hated writing so much. It wasn't that he hated writing, I believe he used to. Douglas Adams, he was being paid a lot of money to write books. And he began calculating how much he was being paid to write the word the, or and, or for. And he thought he would say, now he figured out it was probably like 6 or 7 or 12 quid for the word for. And he thought, but the word for isn't worth 12 quid. A decent adjective maybe, but not the word for. And apparently he kind of ground to a halt over the amount of money he was being paid and the books that he was writing. He just had a real kind of crisis of confidence. Whereas most people just go, yeah, just give me the money. Yeah. I'll take it. That's fantastic. I was recently at a crime convention, and a very well-known writer gave a talk. He was a proselytizer for e-publishing. And a friend of mine came up and said, do you know X? And I said, I don't know him terribly well. I know him a bit. He said, he came up to me about a couple of months ago and said, how's your new book going? And I said, it didn't go very well. I said, I got started and got about 30,000 words done, and then I had to kind of put them aside because it was a false start and I had to go back again. And this guy said, I'll buy those 40,000 words off you.
Nice.
And he said, what? He said, I can turn them around in about 4 days. He said, I'll give you £1,000 for those 40,000 words. And the guy said, no, I'm not going to do that. But it's like somebody buying a fridge magnet set. I'll buy, there you go. I'll say there's a couple of nice vowels in there. There's a couple of adjectives. There's a noun or two that I'm very proud of. What do you give me for that? Little Scrabble tiles. It's just absurd. So how do we get onto that?
Yes, I
Do you have another
bridged my
question?
colours. You just thrown me completely. Now, the first book in the Charlie Parker series, and this is the 11th book.
Yeah.
The 11th one. The first one was Every Dead Thing, published in 1999. Now, tell us how, as an Irishman, you decided to set the books in America.
I think most writers are readers first, and I had a huge antipathy towards Irish fiction when I was in school. When I was doing what are the equivalent of your GCSEs, there were only 2 books you can read. I don't know how many books are on the GCSE course now. I think they're quite a lot.
About 3.
3. Well, we've moved on a long way. But there were 2, and you read one of them. One of the books was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which, is not a bad book to give to teenage boys. And the other was a dreadful Irish novel called Men Withering by Frances McManus. And even the title of that makes your heart sink. It sounds like some form of sexual dysfunction. You go to the doctor and say, touch the old man withering. And, you get a little prescription for blue pills made in Cork, proudly promoting Irish products. This book was so awful that it put me off reading. I was a voracious reader. And it put me off reading for about 3 months. Literally, I couldn't pick up a book. It actually made me want to vomit reading this book. And I just couldn't imagine what it did to people who had never thought reading was much cop anyway. I always thought it was amazing that in schools we would give people hard times to read at the age of 13. Even at the age of 50, Hard Times is a very, very well-named book. You're not going to have a good time reading that book. And it's not... If Charles Dickens was still going into bookstores signing books, he probably wouldn't sign that one. He'd say, I'm really sorry, that one's not very good, but I'll sign Bleak House. And so I had a huge antipathy towards Irish fiction. And I grew up in an Ireland that was it was in the middle of a depression. Or it was probably a depression rather than a recession. We'd never kind of got out of it. We'd never been wealthy. We'd never had any money. It was just getting grimmer and grimmer. And I just wanted any kind of escape from it. Mm-hmm. And I think American literature gave me an escape. Not just American crime fiction, but American literature. And I kind of wanted... It seems so much brighter than Ireland, given the show you have. If you were growing up in Dublin in the middle of like I said, the recession, where I grew up was in the middle of the inner city, it was kind of ground zero, to use the phrase that we were using earlier, for the heroin epidemic in Dublin. It was a really grim place to grow up. And suddenly you see these images of America. And America was entirely different. I mean, it had all of its problems, and there was there was racial tension and there was violence, and there were cities that were kind of crumbling, and yet at the same time, it still looked better than Dublin. I don't care what was there. It was, I was prepared to, I'll go and live in Harlem. I don't mind. I'll be the white guy on the bus. It doesn't matter. Anything's got to be better than Dublin.
I think as American study students, we could all appreciate that. I mean, I love America, and that's kind of my dream, to go and live and work there. But people ask, well, why do you love it so much? And it's like, well, yeah, I've seen a lot of TV and films, but I've been there in real life now, and I know it's not just
some of it is.
All Beverly Hills
Some of it is, and some of it isn't. Some of it kind of lives up to your expectations.
Do you think it was the kind of draw of the kind of the American dream? The American dream, the quote, and the idea of the vastness of America and the opportunities that you could have that you probably wouldn't.
In terms of writing, it was a bigger canvas to work against, and there was so much more potential there. And I didn't really want to, because I knew I was probably going to write a form of crime fiction. That was what I loved. The other option would have been to import elements of American crime literature to Dublin, which wouldn't work. An Irish writer had tried it in the 80s. He'd written a private eye novel set in Dublin, and in Ireland, like here, you can't go around carrying guns. Unless you're a terrorist, but other than that, you can't really go around carrying guns. And so this private detective would mouth off at people. He was a former Gaelic football star, which is like rugby for proper men, and so he would mouth off at people, and he used to wear sandals.
Nice.
And I'm thinking, if a bloke in sandals mouths off, you just stamp on his foot. It's very easy to disarm him. He's not going to be up for much.
You can never really respect a man in sandals.
I'm a hardcore guy. I don't approve of men in sandals, except maybe Jesus, and I don't approve of men in shorts.
Well, that seems acceptable.
I just think above a certain age, men shouldn't wear shorts.
Shorts playing sport, surely. That's allowed.
That's about it. But the minute you come off the sporting field, and if you're on your holiday, I don't care if you're on your holidays. Cover your legs. Cover your pasty, sad-ass, white, Middle England or Middle Ireland. Never gonna tan legs.
Is that not just because the Irish as a race don't sort of tan well?
You don't look like a man who tans much better than I do. We don't tan, but we whenever English and Irish people go on holidays, we think, if we lie out in the sun long enough, we'll tan.
You get the sort of Britain on holiday look of just red raw.
It's lobsterdom. Essentially, everybody turns into a lobster.
Either that or the leathery skin look.
Yeah, no, that's not a good look either. No, and the female of the species tends to err more on the leathery skin look than the male. I think.
Really.
Yeah, it is terrible, you know.
Yeah, they get that mahogany kind of look once they.
Yeah, and they think they're really
60,
attractive.
but-
It's like, oh, this is lovely. Look at me, you know. And it's actually just sort of like somebody moved a piece of teak furniture shaped like a person into the room. You know, it's just dreadful.
So yeah, did you think it was the vastness as in like the Wild West vastness, or was it like the idea of the cities and the expansion?
I think the cities, I suppose, but I ended up in Maine, which is not. It's certainly not the Wild West, but is a frontier state, which people sometimes forget. You know, its frontier there is forest, but you can drop England and Ireland into Maine and lose them, and it only has 1 million people living in it. What always amazes me about England whenever I come over here, I mean, Ireland's a small island, but we only have 4 million people on it. When I come over to England, there's like, 70 million plus living on this side.
That's
You
a lot,
forget what a crowd. And then you go to Maine, and, you know, Maine had these vast forests where, by and large, a lot of people didn't live. And the people who lived on the outskirts of them were very different from the people on the East Coast. You know, on the East Coast is the part that, as you're going up to from Boston, you go for your lobsters and you sit in the nice kind of little stripy places and people bring you beer and it's all very cute. And then you go in, and there's money, because the tourist industry brings money into it. There's industry. And then you go into the interior, and none of this money is trickled down. I think Maine is the 3rd poorest state in the Union, and we associate poverty in America really with the South, not with the North. And the people who go there they have an uncomfortable relationship with other people. He says, be very diplomatic. You know, if you go and live on the edge of a vast forest in a poor area, you're probably not a good mixer. You know, maybe you're not the guy having parties in your house every evening. And their interaction with people tends to be mainly limited to either wealthy people coming in to hunt, for whom they will act as guides and provide services, or occasionally people from the East Coast, from Massachusetts or Connecticut, who have what they call cottages or camps up there where they come to stay occasionally. But they're very individual. And there are such contrasts of season there. You know, if you really have a winter that's 4 months long, you have the spectacularly beautiful autumn and a summer that kind of is gone in the blink of an eye. And all of those things are appealing for a writer, because you have all of those contrasts between, you know.
I suppose you've got the drastic differences as you said, in the seasons. You've got the harsh winter you can use for desperation, then the fall, then the brief
and because
summer.
landscape is so important in mystery fiction in a way that it isn't, say, in women's contemporary literature. That it doesn't really matter where it's set. But landscape has always figured very importantly in mystery fiction. And so if you find somewhere that you can use, that's useful. And one of the appealing things about Maine, I'd worked there, so I knew a little bit about it, was that it didn't have many crime writers. You know, its best known writer was, and still is, Stephen King. You know, he was doing something very different up the road in Bangor. And he's curious, you know, he keeps the state going. The state of Maine is essentially kept going on Stephen King's taxes. You know, he really, and you know, the libraries, that library in Bangor has this extraordinary library in this very run-down city, which he's built. It looks like something out of Rome. You know, it's amazing. And when his local radio station was closing down, he played this he kind of likes a certain kind of old man boogie, I suppose, that doesn't appeal to me very much, kind of guitar-driven music. When it was closing down, he just bought it, because they were going to play music that he didn't like, which I think is great. You know, you're just going to play my music because I own you. I own your ass. Play the music I like. Yeah, no REM after Man in the Moon, and no shiny happy people. Okay, you're not allowed to play that, or else you don't have a job. And then, of course, he got hit by that. You know, it was a real main thing. If you remember, Stephen King, about not quite a decade ago, got hit by a van when he was reading. He was walking. He liked reading by the side of the road when he walked, as you do. And a bloke who was very memorably said, "I was trying to feed my dog one of them Mars's bars," crashed into it, and it broke pretty much every bone in his body. I remember his wife bought the truck that hit him. His wife bought the camper van for therapy for him and put it in the garage, and gave him a baseball bat. And when he was angry, when he was going through therapy and when he was recuperating, he would go into the garage and beat this thing with a baseball bat. The really interesting thing was the guy who killed him, or the guy who nearly killed him, died less than a year later. And he died on Stephen King's birthday. Now, that's the kind of thing you get in a Stephen King book. You know, clearly that's just, I just thought that was amazingly creepy. And I thought, memo to self, do not cross Stephen King. Stephen King actually in touch with the netherworld.
Or at least don't go out of your house on Stephen King's birthday if you ever do cross it.
No, just stay at home and actually don't try and plug anything.
Don't get out of bed.
Yeah, just sit very quietly.
Have the
don't
day
touch
off.
anything. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, talking about the supernatural, Charlie Parker is most definitely haunted by ghosts of the past, to put it politely. I want to know if you're inspired to give the books a supernatural edge by the country that brought us 2 X-Files movies and 9 seasons of the X-Files. And
not by the X-Files,
theories
no.
creepy stuff.
I was probably, while I tried to shake off a lot of my Irishness, you just can't do it. You're always the product of the place that you came from. And our genre fiction, we've never really written crime fiction in any great quantities until recently. But our genre fiction for a long time was fantasy fiction. If you look at the great Gothic novelists, I'm talking Sheridan Le Fanu writing Uncle Silas, Bram Stoker writing Dracula, Charles Maturin writing Melmoth the Wanderer, and Oscar Wilde writing The Pictures of Dorian Gray. They're kind of the cornerstones of the Gothic tradition. They're all Anglo-Irish writers. Curiously, they're all Protestants as well. And they write about men living in old crumbling houses surrounded by a hostile population. Where they got that from, I don't know, in Ireland. So it was, but that was the kind of fiction we wrote. We've always been very good with fantasy, with anti-rationalism, and crime fiction is born out of rationalism. And I suppose that element of it crept in, but the real influences of me were actually English writers in terms of that. I love Denmore James, who I still think is the great practitioner of the ghost story in any language, and I kind of stopped with him. I just think it doesn't really get any better than that. So all of that stuff kind of got folded in, but when I began writing in that way and mixing genres, it wasn't really done in crime fiction at all, and the conservative element in British mystery fiction in particular hated it. I mean, really felt that I shouldn't exist, that I was some kind of affront to the whole tradition, and that eventually Agatha Christie was going to crawl out of the tomb and try and beat me to death with her leg bone, that this was just not appropriate at all. Because they were very much part of that older tradition that felt that actually the world could be understood through a process of logic and rationality. And most of us think, I think whether you come from a Judeo-Christian background or not, that the world is much stranger than that. And that kind of rationalism is not enough to explain the way people behave. Just look at what you were talking about before the news. That's not the product of a rational universe. That is the product of something else entirely. So every day we're kind of confronted with the strangeness of the world and the strangeness of human motivation. So I guess I folded part of that into what I was doing.
So what are your memories of 9/11?
I was at my aunt's funeral, curiously enough, and was on my way home, and I got whatever. I was listening to a talk radio show in Ireland, and Joe Duffy, the host, said he was watching. He had just said a plane had hit the Pentagon, and then he said another plane had hit, and you could hear the dawning awareness, because I think when the first plane hit, there was an assumption that it was an accident. And even in New York, because people were not, it's not like now where everybody has the internet on their phone. News was just not being communicated as quickly. So they seemed like discrete incidents. And really, I think it was only probably when the first plane hit, certainly when the second plane hit the Twin Towers, that people thought actually something very bad is happening here. And I remember going home and watching it, and it was extraordinary watching this thing unfold, and sitting in front of the television, really, recognizing that you were part of a moment in history, not any moment in history you particularly wanted to be part of, but you could not tear your eyes from the screen. And I remember the shock of when the first tower collapsed. I remember just because I think I was watching on the BBC, and because the commentator is still talking about something else, and it takes him a moment to realize what has happened. It was so unexpected and so unanticipated. I mean, it was extraordinary. And I have seen that 102 minutes documentary is unbelievable to watch. It is amazing and beautifully constructed. My memory, it's all awful, but there's a lovely moment in it where they're in one of the firehouses, and these guys are sitting down and counting their dead. And this guy walks in, who they assume covered in dust, and there's, out of all of this, one of them kind of came back. It's full of those fantastic human moments. I think it's an extraordinary piece of work.
Okay, so
I'm sure we could talk and talk and talk. Very interesting stuff. But Waterstones will probably be on the phone in a minute trying to find out where you are.
Is he coming?
So we will have to cut it short there, I'm afraid. It's been very interesting.
Thank you for
John.
having me. It's been
thank you for coming in. And the Waterstones talk begins
at 7 o'clock.
7,
35 minutes.
So if you,
but obviously they should keep listening to your show. Now, when your show's over, hot tail it over to me.
It sounds fantastic. So yeah, thank you for joining us. We have another song. American Dream Team will be back after this. REM, Shine It. No, it's not. It's not really. It's not really.
I have to punch it.
John Connolly, thank you very much.